Hello, everybody. This is Susan Kokinda with your Midweek Update. Today is November 27th, and it's the day before Thanksgiving. 235 years ago, we celebrated our first Thanksgiving as a new republic. George Washington signed a Thanksgiving proclamation, which called for November 26, 1789, to be devoted by the people of these states to the service of that great and glorious being who is the beneficent author of all the good that was, that is, or that will be. I'm going to come back to Washington's proclamation at the end of this update. But let's begin with where we are on November 27th of this year. What you are seeing playing out strategically and economically is what you might call the Trump effect. The election of and the mandate given to Donald Trump is already impacting the real world, even before he takes office. It's almost like you have two parallel universes. You have the globalist managed and British influenced Biden administration, which I'm going to keep referring to as the Biden-Starmer administration, thanks to British Prime Minister Keir Starmer's direct hand in U.S. strategic policy. They live inside their rules-based order, which is grounded on the presumption that their worldview is ordained by some satanic set of gods and that everyone in the world will bend to it simply because they have the power. As I'll discuss in a minute, Vladimir Putin and the Oreshnik hypersonic missile have done a pretty good job of puncturing that dangerous and still potentially suicidal fantasy. On the other hand, in the other universe, the one which recognizes that there actually are universal principles which will govern the success or failure of a nation or a civilization, in that universe lives President Trump and, I would say, most of his incoming team. Not surprisingly, because the Trump team is functioning, in reality is already responding, even in the transition phase. We make it our business to keep you grounded in this world of universal principles. And if you are enjoying these broadcasts, please subscribe to Promethean Action's newsletter and support us. So first, the strategic situation. The Russian deployment of their hypersonic missile in response to the Anglo-Americans unleashing their Ukrainian proxy to shoot long-range missiles into Russia is the equivalent of the universe saying, "Wake the F up." As knowledgeable commentators like Steve Bryen have made clear, we have no defenses against these hypersonic missiles. That's why Putin has made clear that any further use of them in Ukraine will be accompanied by advance warning so that civilians can get out of the way, because again, there is no defense against them. There would have been a defense against them if the Anglo-American establishment had not sabotaged Ronald Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative 40 years ago. Lyndon LaRouche, who mentored many of us here at Promethean Action, played a direct role in the development of Reagan's SDI. I was in the Washington, D.C. office of our organization at the time and saw firsthand the battle for the SDI, a battle which, by the way, is documented quite powerfully in the recent movie Reagan. I also saw the subsequent failure to actually develop and deploy it under an unrelenting assault by the uniparty forces which prominently featured the Bush-Cheney crowd, who of course continue to be the implacable enemies of Donald Trump. That sabotage also included the prosecution and jailing of LaRouche by the same forces that came after Donald Trump decades later. What LaRouche stressed, what Reagan understood, and what Donald Trump understands is that the defense of a nation rests on the strength of its economy and its ability to make never-ending scientific and technological breakthroughs. Reagan's SDI was grounded in the idea of having a defense based on new physical principles, and that will always give you an advantage over a technologically stagnant offense. And if anything defines a technologically stagnant offense, it is our bloated, pigs-at-the-trough defense budget, which feeds the military-industrial complex. It's pretty clear that Vladimir Putin does understand this economic principle as well, given the fact that the Russian economy has recently become the fourth most powerful in the world, despite, or maybe because of, sanctions and economic warfare. There is a really big difference between in a world of nuclear superpowers, where one side of them is nuts, namely the Biden-Starmer combination, and living in a world where all of the leaders have a grasp of reality, as we will be in once Trump is inaugurated. It's not a piece of cake, but it's a different world. What defines the present moment is that we're in a kind of twilight zone between the two. But again, the Trump effect is becoming an increasing factor. It is the case, as Trump's new national security advisor, Mike Waltz, said in a series of interviews this week, that the Trump team is in discussion with the Biden team as part of the transition process. But if you listen to Waltz's various interviews, you hear a very clear message coming across, one undoubtedly dictated by Trump himself, and which is very different from that of the lame duck administration. Waltz keeps stressing that Trump is very concerned about the carnage in Ukraine. Waltz said, "It's just an absolute meat grinder of people and personnel on this front. It's more akin to World War I trench warfare." He keeps repeating that Trump wants to get off the escalation ladder, asking where's it going to end, and that Trump wants to restore policies based on peace and deterrence, whether it takes the form of a deal or an armistice. Waltz also made clear that Trump was not consulted on the Biden-Starmer decision to give Ukraine permission to launch their missiles into Russia. I found Waltz's interview to be very nuanced, clearly reflecting Trump's position. And that's something I think all those armchair quarterbacks out there ought to keep in mind as they continue to freak out about neocons and Zionists in the Trump camp. The members of the Trump 47 team have been appointed and will be expected to reflect Donald Trump's policies, not whatever positions they may or may not have held in the past. Reflecting that new direction, Waltz also made clear that he intends to bend the NSA staff to the president's policies, rather than the previous situation where the staff thought that they were the rulers of the universe and undermined the president. In our recent updates, Barbara Boyd and I have both discussed this fourth branch of government, or administrative state, and how the Trump team is prepared to take it down and take it down hard. Russ Vaught's appointment as Office of Management and Budget Head makes that abundantly clear. So, what is the effect already on the world of the Trump factor? The most dangerous front, of course, is Ukraine and Russia. Seymour Hersh, whose ties to the saner layers of the military and intelligence community stretch back to the 1960s, asked the question, why is Putin, who is clearly furious about the Ukrainian missile launch, and who's talking about the fact that Russia is now at war with NATO, why is he not moving against the Ukrainian army with all force? What Hersh suggests is that, quote, the answer could be messaging from Donald Trump, perhaps relayed through a close associate. Hersh recaps Trump's statements throughout the campaign, statements which were reinforced by these recent Waltz interviews, that the fighting must end. Hersh points to this consistency and says that this, quote, adds to the credibility of what I've been learning in recent weeks, that an understanding about the mechanisms for ending the war has been debated and discussed and even tentatively outlined between informal advisors to Trump and Putin and their teams. I was told by one American that the lines are open between those representing the two men, with some vague assurances sent and received, unquote. Now, it's highly unlikely that something as sensitive as that is going to be confirmed or made public. But frankly, I'd be a little surprised if something like that isn't going on. The name Rick Grinnell has been floated as a mediator, and he might possibly be the close associate referred to by Hersh. As I saw here in Michigan, Grinnell is more than capable of dealing with delicate situations, as he did in opening up discussions with the Muslim Arab American communities and conducting sensitive discussions, which played the most critical role in cementing Trump's victory in this swing state. I also think that it's notable that Trump personally has not said anything about this recent escalation, which would be consistent with such back channels. All that being said, however, the situation remains incredibly dangerous and on a hair trigger as long as the Biden-Starmer team is in place. It is urgent that American citizens not let down their guard over this holiday week and continue to bombard their elected officials with the demand that Biden be called to account and that he address the Congress and the American people on the reasons for this insane escalation. Over on the other side of the pond, the British people are making their view of Prime Minister Starmer well known, with over 2 million of them now signing a petition calling for new elections because the Labour Party has failed on what they were elected to do. Elon Musk posted on X that petition with an included comment that the British people have had enough of this tyrannical police state. And his post boosted the rate of signatures to 100,000 per hour. Now look at the Mideast. As of this moment, it looks like the Israeli-Hezbollah agreement is holding, nominally negotiated by the United States and the French. But again, as Walt said in these interviews, the Trump effect creates the circumstances where everybody is ready to deal. How quickly that effect can bring the carnage in Gaza to an end still remains to be seen. Let's turn to the economy. This was the week where Donald Trump took the most beautiful word in the English language, namely tariffs, and began to wield it, not just economically, but strategically. As he did throughout his campaign, Trump makes clear that tariffs are not just a weapon to protect our manufacturing, they're a foreign policy weapon, which he is using against Canada, Mexico, and China to not only stop imports, but to stop the flows of fentanyl, which has killed more Americans than many of our wars, and to stop the influx of terrorists and criminals. Responses from the leaders of Canada, Mexico, and China have been as expected, but it's clear that they know that they must be prepared to deal with this new reality, and they will adjust accordingly. Trump's other economic appointments this week, especially that of his new trade negotiator, Jamieson Greer, who worked under the previous trade negotiator, Lighthizer, hammered home Trump's intention to use tariffs as a centerpiece of both economic and foreign policy. I might remind our viewers that the British have been equally clear in expressing their hatred of tariffs, with the London Economist making that the make or break issue in their ill-fated endorsement of Kamala Harris. We also saw the appointment of Scott Bessent as Treasury Secretary, putting into that position someone who's written an article praising our first Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, who was the genius author of our unique American system. It would be interesting to see when we last had a Treasury Secretary who supported Alexander Hamilton. I guess it might be at least a century, if not more. Now, just as this was being recorded, it was announced that Jay Bhattacharya was just tapped to head the National Institute of Health, which should be setting on fire the hair of people in the medical industrial complex. And of course, we're still waiting for one final big appointment. That's the FBI director, with the hoped-for nomination of Kash Patel. Please continue to sign and circulate our petition to the Senate, demanding that they confirm them all. Look for the link in the description. In closing, I want to return to George Washington's first Thanksgiving proclamation, where he calls on the American people to devote themselves to the service of that great and glorious being who is the beneficent author of all the good that was, that is, or that will be. It is indeed time to heed that message, that there is a power in the universe, which is the author of all that is good. I would take that as a foundational principle of a republic. That is, we are beholden to something which is not arbitrary or a temporary whim of a popular or manufactured impulse. I want to conclude with Washington's final words in that proclamation, where he offers our prayers and supplications to the great Lord and ruler of nations to render our government a blessing to all the people by constantly being a government of wise, just, and constitutional laws, discreetly and faithfully executed and obeyed, to promote the knowledge and practice of true religion and virtue and the increase of science among all, and generally to grant unto all mankind such a degree of temporal prosperity as he alone knows to be best. This has been your Midweek Update, the day before Thanksgiving 2024. We have much to be thankful for. So thank you for listening and have a joyful holiday.
Thanks for your continued support. Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at prometheanaction.com. Have a happy Thanksgiving.